Today on Full Tilt Drift, we're installing a Bilstein lift kit on my 4Runner. First, we need to get the parts ready and get it jacked up. For this install, we have front shocks, rear shocks, and rear springs. You'll also need to run a spring compressor from the parts store. Our rear shocks are pretty self-explanatory. We've got a separate shock and spring, which means we're going to lift the back up, take the weight off of the shocks on the back, unbolt them, lower the rear axle, which will relieve the stress on the springs. Then we're going to replace the springs, raise it back up, bolt this shock in there, and we should be good to go. The front shock, though, is a little more interesting. So what we're going to have to do with the new front shock is unbolt the old one, take the spring assembly off, then put the old spring seat, spring, and top hat on our new shock here. You can see right here that it has this snap ring, and that is going to hold the entire weight of the spring on the front of the car.
Hell nah.
Yeah, I'm questioning that too, but we'll see how it goes. These are adjustable, height adjusting shocks, so this snap ring can go up in a couple steps to raise the height of the car. This would be normal ride height. This is about an inch, this is about 1 3/4 inches, and this is about 2.5 inches. So we're going to set it on its max height because we want the lift on this car to go off-roading. We'll see if it holds up. Bilstein's a pretty reputable company, but that seems sketchy. Loosen the lug nuts for all 4 wheels, and don't forget to put a wheel block on the wheels you won't be working on. We're going to start at the back, so the wheel block goes on the front. Jack the car up to get the rear wheels off the ground, and use some jack stands to support the body of the car. Don't put the jack stands under the rear axle, because we're going to need the rear axle to still be able to move while we're working. Still a little dirty from the snow trip that I took, but that's not going to stop us from working on it today. So here's our old rear shock still installed on the car, and you can see by this hydraulic line that runs to the shock body that this has this self-leveling system on it. My 4Runner self-leveling system hasn't been working in a while, so I'm not even sure if there's going to be fluid in here. But even if there is, I'm not real worried about removing it, since it hasn't been doing anything for me. So before removing the rear bolt on the shock, I decided I was going to crack the hydraulic line so that we could get that off of there. I thought it had all leaked out, but as I cracked it, it just spewed a shit ton of fluid all over this area, and luckily I had a drip pan to catch most of it. But yeah, this guy's pressurized, so ye be warned. So I thought I was going to be able to get the shock off without taking this top bolt off, so I could let it hang by that, and then take that off to remove it. But it doesn't look like it has enough play to get off the stud on the bottom. So we're going to have to remove that top bolt first. And to do that, you're going to want some channel locks or something to hold the body with, because it's going to want to rotate while you try to loosen it. So now we have both of the rear shocks off, and we can lower the rear axle to get the old springs out and put the new springs in. So we've got the body of the car supported by jack stands, and the rear axle is on the jack. I'm going to lower the jack, which will lower the axle and free up the springs for us to pull them out. We'll put the new springs in, raise the axle back up, and then bolt in the new shocks. The easiest way to get this sway bar to drop out of the way is to remove this one nut on either side, and it'll fall right through this bracket. And that's how you pull the spring out. So I brought you around to the other side of the car because I can tell that this side is going to be much more difficult getting the spring in. On the other side, I put some weight on the axle with my foot, it drooped down enough, and the spring kind of slid right in. But this side, I can already tell there's not going to be very much room. So, let's see how we're going to do this. Okay. There we go. For those of you not as ridiculously tall and lanky as me, that may be more difficult because I was able to put my foot here and my knee on the wheel well and push the axle down with it. Now let's put the shocks on. Now we need to prepare our rear shock for install by putting the bushings on it. So to do that, we're going to need some dikes to cut this open. When we do, it's going to expand, so we're going to want some droop on the axle to install the shocks. So what I've done here is I've hung the shock with the top bolt, but I haven't installed all of the top bushing because otherwise it wouldn't have fit. Well, that wasn't working, so instead we're going to try attaching the bottom of the shock first and getting the top through the hole as we raise the suspension. Make sure the top of your springs line up as you raise your axle, and throw the bushings and bolts on the top of the shocks. Then you're good to go. I'm also deciding to take the other side of my sway bar link off and leave the sway bar disconnected. I'm doing this so that the rear axle has more articulation off-road and therefore should give me more grip. But if I find that it's overextending, I'll put the sway bar back on or find another solution. Alright guys, we got the rear suspension lift on the 4Runner and it is a lot higher. Here's the front suspension of our 4Runner, and this strut and spring is what we're going to need to take out. The spring here is going to get reused, and that's what we need the spring compressor for, but first we're going to need to get this bad boy out. We'll need to unbolt this ball joint while supporting the lower control arm with a jack, then lower the lower control arm to get it out of the way of removing the strut. We're going to need to unbolt it from the lower control arm here, and the strut should slide right out. After unbolting the bottom of the strut, remove the 3 bolts on top and yank it out. So here we've got one of our old front shocks and one of our new front shocks. And what we're going to need to do is take this spring and top hat assembly and install it on our new shock. To get that done, we're going to use the spring compressor kit that we rented to squeeze this spring down and then take the top hat off. Once you compress the spring, the top hat can be taken off by grabbing this piece with some pliers and turning this nut. So now we're going to set the lift height for the front shocks, and that's done with this snap ring right here. So we're going to take this snap ring up to the top setting so that we have the max height adjustment that we can get. Get the pigtail of the spring into the right place on the seat, and then start installing the top hat. As you can see on the bottom of the top hat, there is also a groove for the spring to sit in. Make sure it goes in the right spot. Installing everything is just a reverse of removing it. Put everything back in, remember to tighten all the bolts, including the lower control arm bolts that you loosened earlier, and the front's all set. And these are the results of the lift. You can see how much taller the car is, about 2.5 inches all the way around, which is just what the lift was rated for. Thanks for watching Full Tilt Drift, guys. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments, and if you leave the video a like, I would appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time.